So our first speaker is Professor Yoel. Professor Rack studies human evolution. He has made many impressive discoveries of human evolution. And if you visit his room, it's a room full of skulls and skeleton. Some of them quite distinguished, I would say. Yoel will address the enigma of the Neanderthal men. This is our cousin, if you want to say, and is definitely part of our evolutionary history of human, or maybe it is a side branch of human evolution, and all we have is a common ancestral with the Neanderthal. In any case, Yoel will speak about the evolutionary history of our closest relative, the Neanderthal. Yoel, please.
Well, thank you, and congratulations, Mark. And you don't know how flattered I am, being an anatomist, invited to speak about new frontiers. And I'm going to talk about bones and paleontology. I'm going to talk about Neanderthals. Neanderthals are fascinating from both aspects, historically and also anatomically. Even though I'm going to concentrate really on the anatomical aspects of Neanderthal and how unique they are and how amazing we are, the more we investigate and the more we find Neanderthals. I will start with the historical side of the Neanderthals. It's a known fact that Neanderthal was actually found 2 years before the origin of species. And since it was such an unbelievable anatomy and unbelievable find, when the first Neanderthal remains were brought to the father of modern pathology, Virchow, he concluded that it's most probably an imbecile or maybe a Russian soldier, the remains of a Russian soldier. So the pendulum, the historical pendulum with Neanderthals is really very interesting because at the beginning, well, it was considered pathology. But the moment it was established that the Neanderthal is a genuine find, at first, people were so eager, so anxious to document. It was right at the time of the origin of species. People were so anxious to document and to provide evidence to human evolution that the Neanderthal was grabbed physically and was forced into a link that leads to us. And this is the very famous skull from La Chapelle-aux-Saints, 1911, and you can see how Neanderthal, with all its peculiarities, was forced actually between a chimp and a human. Even after the very important discoveries in Mount Carmel, I found this old book, and you can see the ladder of progress in Palestine, and it's actually the concept of a ladder that actually dominated the field. And one of my hobbies is to collect these sequences, and the Neanderthal was always walking behind modern humans. And I have more slides, one a Californian slide where everybody's jogging instead of walking. You can see it here, always described as a link, somewhat foolish or an idiotic look on his face. And this was one aspect of Neanderthal interpretation. On the other hand, this is very popular in the 60s with the hippies and with the slogans that we are one. Neanderthal was, I mean, the way we interpret Neanderthals was shifted to the other side. And many people claimed that it's actually the Neanderthal is just another race, very similar to many other races that modern Homo sapiens is blessed with. And this is a very famous picture to demonstrate what is called the motif of the subway in New York, the New York subway. And it was done by Kuhn, and the argument behind it is that if a Neanderthal is dressed like a gentleman and walks to the New York subway, I mean, this is an intentional place. I mean, the New York subway, nobody actually will pay attention to this guy, and you can see that part of the attempt or part of the effort to advance this hypothesis is to put the hat right covering his brow ridges. And of course, with the thigh here, everybody's attention is drawn to the thigh, and at the same time, is drawn away from the fact that the Neanderthal didn't have a chin. And I have even a better example, because this is a poster that I got from the very famous National Geographic painter, Maternis, and it's hanging outside my office. And one day I see one of the medical students passing by, and I said, "Wait a minute, I have to go and get my camera, just to show you that we are still one." Okay? Well, what I'm trying to do now is actually, I'm trying to convince you that the Neanderthal is fascinating from a historical point of view, and mainly fascinating, really incredible anatomy from an anatomical point of view. So the very complete and the very famous Neanderthal, it's called the La Chapelle, the old man from La Chapelle-aux-Saints, and you can see it's called old man. He died at the age of 40. Nevertheless, it's one of the most complete Neanderthals that we know today. And always attention was drawn to the face. The face was described as if somebody is made out of rubber and somebody was pulling it forward, pulling the nose and stretching all the rest of the face accordingly. And we can see it, and you can see that the nasal opening is extending very far forward. And even though the nasal bones are missing, you can see you can reconstruct it very easily as horizontal and not sliding downwards as it is with us. Another thing that is very clear part of the Neanderthal anatomy is the fact that if you trace the topography of the face from the nasal opening to the opening of the ear, you can see that there is really no topographical relief. It extends as a single plate from the back of the skull to the front to the nose. This is quite different from what we see in our own skull. First of all, you can see that the nasal bones are actually sliding down. You can see that the face is actually divided into two distinct planes. One is facing forward, the other one is facing lateral, and there is a distinct corner, a very distinct corner separating these two elements. Now, if I'm looking, and this is the perfect view to appreciate this morphology, you can see that in a basal view, you can see there is really no no angulation from the ear up to the nose. I would like to take advantage of this slide and to draw your attention to the fact, and I'll come back to it, to the fact that the foramen magnum, this is the big hole that the vertebral, the spinal cord is actually attached to the brain, is oval in shape, and we'll come back to it later. This is quite a different configuration. We take a modern human skull. You can see the anteriorly facing plates below the orbits, and you can see the lateral facing plates, and you can see that there is a distinct corner between them. As far as the foramen magnum is concerned, you can see it's completely rounded and very much like many other primates and mammals. And the big question is what is actually, what this anatomy means from a functional point of view. We the paleontologists, we adopt what is called reverse, strategy that is called reverse engineering. It's very much like you go to a flea market and you buy, like going to the flea market and you buy some very peculiar machine, and what you bring it home and you are actually trying to go backwards and to understand what was the intention of this engineer that created this machine. So this is actually, and I need some water. This is actually the very schematic generalized face. And I was talking about the anterior facing bone facial plate and the lateral facing bone plates. And with the Neanderthal, we see a most upheaval. We see a shift in the architecture, and we see that actually these plates are being turned from a coronal orientation to a sagittal orientation. And this is, in my opinion at least, it is done because for some strange reason, the Neanderthal was very interested in the biting food in the anterior part of the dental arcade. And doing so, the moment you are using the anterior teeth for heavy occlusal load, it actually deforms the whole face in a generalized face. And the Neanderthal, in order to cope with this load, actually changed the orientation of these bony plates. It looks like Darth Vader, but the idea is actually here. By the moment you change the orientation of the bony plate, there is really more support and a more efficient support to load on the anterior teeth. So from here, we already suspect that the Neanderthal, with its peculiar anatomy, really doesn't belong to the sequence from Homo erectus to, or even from Australopithecus to modern humans, simply because all the others, they have the generalized face. So in order to advocate a very parsimonious scenario, we have to abandon this, because Homo erectus has the very generalized face, and then during evolution, presumably, the faces became very Neanderthal-like, and it switched back to modern Homo sapiens that still bears on his skull the very generalized face. A much more parsimonious scenario is this: from Homo erectus, we see literally no change in the bony architecture of the face, and the Neanderthal should be a side branch, no matter, and really it has nothing to do with our ability to understand what this anatomy means from a functional point of view. These questions are not relevant. We simply, just because of the peculiarities, we have to remove the Neanderthal on a side branch. Now, I was talking about the anterior load, and you can see that many Neanderthals, they, for some reason, again, we don't understand why, for some reason they were using the anterior teeth, and in some specimens, the wear on the anterior teeth is so extensive that he is actually chewing on the roots of his teeth. You can see it very clearly here, where the enamel is still intact in the posterior teeth, and here even the pulp cavities are actually exposed. And this is actually the reverse of the way we are using our masticatory system. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that it is the anterior teeth that the Neanderthal is placing the bite point. And it's not because the anterior teeth are more suitable for this job, but it is actually because the anterior teeth are in the front. And the Neanderthal, as you will see in another few minutes, the Neanderthal, for some reason, they are very concerned about an enormous gape. And by using the anterior teeth, just by definition, he is using the part of the dental arcade that is capable to produce the largest part of the largest gape in his mouth. Another thing, and things are related, I would like to introduce you to a generalized mandible. Comes from the dissection lab. And you can see this is Homo sapiens with a chin. And I would like to draw your attention to the ascending ramus that is always terminating with two processes, the anterior one and the posterior one. The posterior one is actually the condyle in which the mandible articulates with the base of the skull. But you can see that the two processes are more or less the same in height. And you can see that the notch between them is deep. And actually, the deepest point is right in the middle, okay, at the middle of the distance between the one process to other. When we go to Neanderthal, the picture is completely different. You can see that the coronoid, the anterior one, is very tall, and the posterior process is very low, and you can see that the notch between them is not symmetrical, and actually the deepest point here is very close to the back of the mandible. I would like to take you to Mount Carmel, a very famous site, became a landmark and a shrine almost for every paleontologist. This is the cave I'm talking about, one of the cluster of caves in Mount Carmel. This is the Taboo Cave. And the reason this is me before I turned blonde, you can see. And this is the sequence that was actually excavated during the 20s, late 20s. And the amazing thing there is that right here at what is called level C, a woman, a female Neanderthal was found. And you can see very clearly what I was talking about. There is really no questions about the taxonomic affiliation of this specimen. However, about 6 meters north of the place where this lady was found, in the same layer, the excavators discovered a different skull, a different mandible, at the same layer. And you can see that here we are actually talking about the modern or the generalized configuration. This is really amazing. I ask my students to read the report, the original report, and it's amazing, entertaining almost, to read how difficult for the authors, it was Sir Arthur Keith and McCown, how difficult it was to see the Neanderthal that was supposed to be our ancestor together with something that is very much like us. And you read it, and it's really unbelievable, the twists and the switches that they are making in describing this phenomena. Obviously, it already tells us that we see in this cave, we see actually two evolving lineages. Now, there is a very simple way of quantifying this anatomy. All you have to do is to plot it on a plot of coordinates and 20 segments, and every one is getting a different value. And you can see the moment this is quantified into numerical values, you can run a standard deviation, you can run multivariate techniques. You can see that this is the condyle and this is the coronoid, and you can see that this is the mean of about 300 specimens from all over the world of Homo sapiens, and the Neanderthal is quite a different thing. As I said, the moment it is quantified, you can run all kind of very powerful techniques, and one of them is discriminant analysis, and you can see that the two clusters, this is the Neanderthal and Homo sapiens and the rest of hominids, okay, Homo erectus and all the others. But the interesting thing here is Taboo 1 is the lady, falls right with the Neanderthal, and Taboo 2 falls right in the center of modern humans. Now, I was talking about placing the condyle on a 0 point, but this is an arbitrary decision. I could have done the same with the coronoid and placing the coronoid, the anterior process, on the 0 line, and what you see is that actually the Neanderthal is, the anterior process is not tall, okay, it's very much like modern human, but what is very clear is the condyle is very low. Okay, the condyle is very low. And you can see here, this is a Neanderthal. Both mandibles are oriented on the occlusal plane. You can see very clearly, even though it's 100,000 years old specimen, you can see that this is actually a modern configuration, and this is the Neanderthal. The coronoid is the same size, the same height, and the notch is on the same height. But what's happening here is actually the condyle is descending. Why is it? And we can show it very clearly. And why is it so important? Because the moment the condyle is being lowered, from a biomechanical point of view, it means a huge gape. And it's attached, actually, and it makes a lot of sense with what I said before, that the Neanderthal, for some strange reason, was very concerned about the size of the gape. He was so concerned about the size of the gape that he actually sacrificed other biomechanical advantages and preferred the gape. Another very peculiar anatomy of the Neanderthal is was found here in the cave of Amud. The famous Amud Wadi from our elementary school trips. Okay, and this cave was excavated by the Japanese in the 60s. They found the Neanderthal there, and I kind of initiated in the early 90s, to renew this excavation. This is the old trench of the Japanese, and we just extended it a little bit to the north and a little bit to the south. And we were very lucky. Okay, it looks like a pancake, but we were very lucky at the second season to find a baby Neanderthal covered, buried intentionally in this cave. You can see the mandible, you can see the skull, you can see the ribs, the pelvis, and the limbs. This is how it looks today, and you can see very clearly that even though very little was actually found of the skull, you can see the foramen magnum that is very oval. And this is an amazing thing, that with no difficulties whatsoever. It's a 9-month-old baby. You can tell that it's a Neanderthal. Why is it so important? Because usually a young individual, this is a well-known fact, a young individual is hiding the taxonomic identity. It's very easy. Everybody of us can identify or can distinguish between a gorilla and human in the mature stage. But many will have difficulties to distinguish between a human and a gorilla, a newborn. Okay, this is why it's so important. And even though we are talking about a very young individual, it's already exhibiting the very typical Neanderthal anatomy. Very, very early in time, I suspect, means a very extreme deviation from the generalized form. Well, this is the Foramen Magnum, and you can see another one, Elgis in Europe. Now, the amazing thing here, and Israel is playing a major role in understanding the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. There is a cave here, and not far from Nazareth. This is Jabal Kafse, and this is Jabal Kafse, or Kafse Cave. And already in the 20s, there were a lot of fossils coming out, and they look very much like us. They look very much like us, and again, it was very puzzling, and being actually a prisoner of their own concepts, they dated the cave on the basis of the human fossils. They said, since the Neanderthal evolved to human, and these are not Neanderthal, but already modern human, and fossilized, so they gave it a date of about 30,000 years, maybe 25,000 years, just to fit it in a very nice sequence. And my dear friend and colleague, Eitan Chernov, who was a paleontologist for many years, I remember it was a joke in every conference, for many years, he and Professor Haas, his teacher and my teacher, he was arguing that the cave is actually, judging from the microfauna, the cave is about 100,000 years old. How can it be? They look modern, and you'll see they are so similar to us that nobody will distinguish a specimen from Kafsa had it been found in a biblical mount. Okay, this is a nice view on the Garinim Shel Emek Israel, and this is the skull. It looks simply modern, even though today, with thermoluminescence, it's an established fact that Eitan Chernov and Haas were right. It's about 100,000 years. And it makes a lot of sense the moment you view the Neanderthal as a side branch. Depends who is telling the story. You know, if the Neanderthal was standing here, we would be the side branch. But the Neanderthal at least is a parallel branch, evolving in parallel and walking in his own trial. You can see very clearly, and it's Al-Khzor. I'm sorry. You can see very clearly that it is modern looking. Even the Foramen Magnum in this specimen and in this specimen has nothing to do, actually no resemblance whatsoever with the very peculiar, still mysterious and enigmatic Foramen Magnum. We don't understand what actually what is the functional reason for such a peculiar Foramen Magnum. Okay, today we know the Neanderthals are actually European and they kind of migrated to the Middle East, probably because of fluctuation, because of fluctuation in the climate in Europe. And this is the reason why we find here in Israel, because the Neanderthal territory was actually, the border of their distribution was actually the Middle East. And the one cave here in Israel, also in Mount Carmel, contains a Neanderthal, and it's the most southern Neanderthal ever found. Neanderthals were adapted to very cold conditions, and you can see they took advantage of the caves, and they were always competing with the cave bear to rule these caves. So this is actually the Neanderthal territory. Today we extend it a little bit farther to the east, but this is actually the border of their distribution. And since the border is actually shifting, climatically shifting north and south, this is the reason why, and it's the only place in the world, why Neanderthals and Homo sapiens are actually occupying the same caves and sometimes the same layers. This doesn't mean that they were sitting and playing cards in the Taboo Caves, because the resolution of our methods won't permit us to identify 1,000 years difference between them. So for some reason, the Neanderthal was using the anterior teeth, not because he needed the anterior teeth, but just because the location of the anterior teeth permits the widest gape. And the widest gape is actually executed by a very low condyle. As I said before, the lower the condyle, the greater you can open your mouth. Still, we don't know why do they do it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yoel, for this exciting talk. The floor is open for question. Actually, maybe I start with the question. You mentioned that the Neanderthal and the Homo sapiens were concurrent. But
Did they love?
Well, did they love? That's the second question, the follow-up question. The question was, is there any evidence that they were really sympatric in a way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. Both in Europe and here, they were sympatric. Here, it was at the beginning of the scenario. In Europe, it extended to the end of the Neanderthal existence. And some say that actually this brought the extinction of Neanderthal. I couldn't see any evidence for it. Okay. Yeah, so I cannot see any evidence, even though it's a very popular, a very exciting hypothesis that one actually killed the other or displaced the other and things like this. We don't have any evidence for such dramatic news.
And no evidence for social contacts between the two?
Well, social contact, we do have now the Neanderthal, the first draft of the Neanderthal genome is and there is some kind of one direction interbreeding, which is not so surprising. We are talking about very close, phylogenetically, very close two species. And about 20% of species in general recognize this legitimate species, they have some kind of interbreeding. But it wasn't a significant contribution, let's put it this way. And it was only with the Homo sapiens that actually left Africa. All the Africans, they have no trace to the Neanderthal DNA.
David?
The anatomy that you described is that the Neanderthal
I tried to avoid this discussion because indeed all the carnivores, in order to, and for a different reason, they have to clear the canines, okay? The huge canines, they have the same thing because they lower the condyles even below the occlusal plane to reach a conclusion that this is evidence that he was a carnivore. I wouldn't go as far. I know that they were eating meat and they were omnivore actually from archaeo. I can just say they were omnivores, eating both.
No evidence in the teeth?
No. Oh, there are many dissertations dedicated to this very unique whale, and nothing is convincing.
Please, Mark.
Well, if modern human got to the Levant at 100,000, how come we all believe that they left Africa about 60 to 70,000 years?
Well, it's a good question. I presented it as a Homo sapiens, even though these very old specimen, I start to suspect that they are actually they belong to the clade of Homo sapiens, but they are not Homo sapiens. Okay.
Not an abortive
Yeah.
migration.
Yeah.
That didn't work.
That's right. And there is a puzzling thing, you know, because according to the DNA now, the Neanderthal split from human about 500,000. Now, if Homo sapiens, the date for Homo sapiens is 200,000, I know you even push it. It means that there are other species to connect between Homo sapiens that live today, and this is a very, very exciting hypothesis, because it's very difficult to take DNA from these Mount Carmel so-called Homo sapiens. But I have very little doubt that modern Homo sapiens and these guys that we call early Homo sapiens are actually the same clade, but they are two different species. And I even would go farther, that the little evidence of inbreeding between Homo sapiens, between Neanderthal and European, it's not inconceivable that it comes through a different species in between, okay? Because this anatomy that I was describing, with taking this anatomy as the yardstick, you know, to distinguish, or using the yardstick that zoologists are using, these are two species. This is day and night in terms of anatomy. And I was talking only about the teeth and the mandible. The pelvis tells the same story, and the hand tells the same story. So that's what.
Well, thank you very much.